what we've heard from Lebanon, it seems that the Israeli drones are over Beirut, and when you look at the situation in Lebanon, do you think that we are heading towards some sort of confrontation between the Lebanese, even Lebanese army, or maybe Hezbollah and Israeli IDF?
Yes, it's possible. Netanyahu is a person who clearly needs crises in order to remain in power. This is a discussion that we've been having for over 2 years now, and I think many of your guests probably think the same. From the very beginning, it was clear that Netanyahu did not want a ceasefire. During the first 2 3 months, it was many people were predicting the genocide to stop, and then it kept going on, and Biden did nothing about it. Then Trump did nothing about it. All of them enabled it. They both presidents, the Europeans, and every time Netanyahu, instead of backing down, he push further. So whether it's Gaza or Lebanon or Syria, where he and Erdogan and Biden together overthrew the Syrian government, or Yemen, these are all escalations that came out as a result of his the needs of Netanyahu himself, and of course his allies that keep him in power, the fanatical right wing Zionists. And of course, the war with Iran was the same. Now, of course, we know that the U.S. Secretary of State and National Security Advisor was lying, and that the United States was along. They were. Trump was behind the war from day one. But at the end of the day, it was based on Netanyahu's needs. The reason I think why Trump is constantly pushing for some sort of pardon for Netanyahu is probably because the Trump regime and many Zionists recognize that Netanyahu is destroying the Israeli regime. We now see how inside the United States the people have turned against it. First, it was the leftists, then it was the liberals, and now the right. This is a civil war which the Zionists are losing on all fronts, and it's only going to get worse. So I think Trump probably would want to see him get a pardon so that he would not feel the need to continue with this war. Whether that's true or not, that's another issue. But I think for now, we should be expecting escalation, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in Lebanon, or whether it's with Iran.
Here is what Donald Trump said. It seems that he's considering new sanctions on Iran, but because he was asked about the sanctions on Russia that the Republicans are preparing to impose on Russia, and he said something responding to that question. He said something about Iran. Here is what he said, Professor.
Well, I hear they're doing that, and that's okay with me. They're passing legislation, or the Republicans are putting in legislation that very tough. It's sanctioning, et cetera, on any country doing business with Russia. They may add Iran to that, as you know. I suggested it. So any country that does business with Russia will be very severely sanctioned. We may add Iran to the formula, yeah.
Yeah. He wants to add Iran to the sanctions, but after all, looking at the attitude of the Trump administration, what do they want to achieve about it? Because I don't know if there is any other sanction, any additional sanction to be imposed on Iran, because everything is
Nima,
sanctioned.
Nima, you have to start learning English. Me too. There's a word called maximum. It's called maximum pressure. We have to learn the word. Apparently, it does not mean, from our understanding, it doesn't mean the most. It's maximum pressure. It's apparently this it doesn't mean what we used to think it means. So we have to relearn the English language. So when Trump says he's imposed maximum pressure sanctions, that apparently doesn't mean that he's done everything he can. So obviously, your English and my English has to improve. We have to, the maximum apparently means somewhere in the middle. But at the end of the day, he's already imposed maximum pressure sanctions. What else can he do? What can he do against Iran? Nothing. In fact, the sanctions against Russia are not as extensive as Iran. I mean, the Russians say that they're the most sanctioned country in the world. Actually, that's not the case. They're getting nearer and nearer to Iran. But the Iranian sanctions regime is very comprehensive and it goes back decades. But what he is doing is he's pushing, first of all, Russia closer to Iran. Second of all, he is by doing this, by putting this a law through Congress, he is closing the doors to any negotiations. Why? Because part of the sanctions regime is based on law, and part of it is based on presidential authority. If those sanctions that are linked to presidential authority are handed over to Congress, then there's no negotiation in future because the US government cannot remove anything. So his scope of authority, and the United States is very good at imposing sanctions. It's very terrible at removing sanctions. We discussed this before. Nelson Mandela, when he was the head of the ANC, the United States declared him to be a terrorist and the ANC as a terrorist organization. He was freed from prison. He was still a terrorist. He became president. He was still a terrorist. He ended his term in office. He was still a terrorist. Years later, after he retired from politics, the United States removed him and the ANC from the sanctions, from the terrorist designation. Once the United States imposes something, it doesn't remove it easily. So the incentive for any negotiations between Iran and the United States decline because they know that if Trump sends someone to mediate to talk with Iran, that person does not have any authority. The JCPOA itself was limited partially because the United States government at that time did not have the authority to remove all the sanctions. It only had the authority to remove some of the sanctions. The rest were sanctions that were imposed through law. So by doing this, Trump is closing the door to Iran and Russia for a very long time. And that is good for Iran because it allows Russia to have very long-term planning with Iran in future because they know that once the laws have been passed, those laws are not going to be removed because the president may want them removed, but Congress may not accept to do so. In addition to that, the United States, we saw how the United States and the Europeans tried to use the snapback mechanism against Iran just recently. And we discussed this on your show. The snapback mechanism, they were portraying it through their Persian language media and through propaganda as decisive and how it's going to crush the Iranian economy. And I think I said on your show that it's going to, for a while, it's going to spook the markets. But after a few weeks, once they've used it and people see that it had no effect, they lose their leverage. The United States has lost its leverage. And I think the snapback mechanism that they tried to use was a clear sign of that. Not only did they push Russia and China closer to Iran, and they issued that statement saying they do not recognize any of the UN Security Council resolutions, but also they showed ordinary Iranians that the European and American attempt to crush the economy failed completely. Right now, no one in Tehran is talking about snapback. No one is talking about new sanctions because nothing happened. So Trump, now that, again, you and I have to relearn our English, maximum pressure sanctions, once they've been imposed, what is there to impose that makes it more maximum than maximum? Unless, again, you and I have to relearn the word, and it means something different from what we learned at school. So I see this as a useless endeavor. It is good for Iran. It is good for Iran because it makes the Russians more inclined to forget about Europe and the United States permanently and to rethink their foreign policy completely. And we will be there to engage with them. The Iranians have made a decisive decision. You know Iranian politics. You saw how the Speaker of Parliament and how others have spoken about Iran's relationship and how the chair of the Supreme National Security Council, Dr. Larijani, how the foreign minister, how the president, how everyone has spoken about Iran's relationship with Russia and China. So Iran has made a decision. And by behaving in this sort of manner, whether it's against Russia or China or anyone else, the United States is only consolidating for the Iranians this policy.
Professor Marandi, we've heard from the some reports show that Iran has sent emergency alerts to citizens' mobile phone nationwide, signaling that it may be preparing for war in December. And what is the understanding on the part of the officials in Iran? Do they really believe that we're going to have a new round of attack or maybe some sort of war? Or they see the possibility of talks, negotiations, communications?
No, they don't believe that there's going to be a war, nor do they believe that that war is not possible. There's no shift in Tehran. The belief in Tehran is that you have to prepare for war in order to prevent the Israeli regime and its Western allies from carrying out new aggression. And if they do carry out the aggression anyway, that they pay the price for it. That's the policy. They're working to defend, to strengthen their defense capabilities and to strengthen their offensive capabilities. And of course, since the Israeli regime is barbaric, since the EU, they are barbaric, since the British, the Canadians, and the Americans, these regimes are all barbaric, the Iranians know that there could be a surprise attack at any time. They'll target apartment buildings, they'll target children, they'll target families. And then Western media will say that these are precision strikes and this is an intelligence coup, but in reality, they'll be targeting ordinary people. So the Iranians are preparing themselves. And one way of preparing the country is to have a mechanism by which they can immediately tell people to be prepared in case there's some sort of attack, or if there's some other issue, an earthquake or some natural disaster. But this is something very simple. The Iranians are, it is a part of improving the country's ability to protect its citizens. But there's no new information with regards to potential war. The Iranians are assuming that there is going to be war, not because they really think there it will necessarily happen, but in order to be better prepared, they have to assume that aggression will be carried out. So it is possible that we will have war in December. It is possible that we won't have war in December. But the Iranians are going to prepare themselves as if war is tonight.
As we've learned from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, he said that the Americans are trying to talk with Iranians. They're trying to push for the talks. But whatever happens, Professor Marandi, do you think that the first step for Americans to show that they're serious in their attitude in if they want to negotiate, if they want some sort of talks with Iranian, would be the sanctions? Start removing the sanctions on Iran. What is that the first step that would work?
Okay, let me point something out here. I don't know if you know this, Nima, or not, but your show is watched by some people who are actually influential. And I know this because I've been told so. Over the past, over the last few, I don't know, recently, I've had talks with people from the West, in general. And the problem in our discussions, this I think was clear, and I pointed this out to them. The problem in the West, Nima, is that they cannot come to the recognition that Iran is not going away. They like to believe their propaganda that Iran is a regime. Often when I say Western regimes, I say it because that's how they speak of Iran. So I reciprocate as an Iranian or as a critic of the West. They believe Iran is a regime, and a regime is something unstable. So if there's protest somewhere, if a group of men or women are protesting, they say, "Oh, there's instability." And but in the West, if you have the yellow jackets, or if you have people on the streets protesting, they never say that, "Oh, there's instability in Europe or the United States." But if the same thing happens in Iran, they say it's instability. If in the West there are fights between coalition members or the opposition party and the government, they call it checks and balances and politics. In Iran, they call it a power struggle, right? So in Iran, we have politics every day. The websites, the Telegram channels, they're attacking each other on Twitter, different factions, supporters of the administration, opponents of the administration, supporters of the, I don't know, the head of judiciary, the opponents of him, the parliament, the leader, everyone. You'll see that all the time in Iran, but they don't recognize this because they live within their bubble, where Iran is an unstable regime, and that is why when the Israeli regime attacked, they all thought that Iran is going to collapse because they believe their own nonsense. They don't understand that Iran is a very sophisticated country with checks and balances. You have public participation in politics. Iranian women are much more empowered than other parts of this region, and I would argue Iranian women are much more respected than Western women in the West. Iranian women can walk the streets of Tehran at 12 p.m. on their own, and they can be pretty sure that no one will touch them, no one will harass them. That's not something that you can say about many Western cities. We have women scientists, we have women parliamentarians, we have women academics, we have women taxi drivers, we have women pilots. But they want to see everything about Iran as abnormal and Iran being a regime. And so the regime does not have permanency. It is going to fall. So they will never think about Iran 20 years from now. They'll say 20 years from now, it will be different. We'll wait it out. The chances that they'll be different are greater than Iran. Or let's say they speak about the leader after the leader. Have no doubt that the leader who's very healthy, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, if he passes away, there'll be a new leader. The constitutional process will be in place, and you'll have the same Islamic Republic of Iran. But they can't get this through that bubble. That bubble protects them from reality. So when they negotiate, they cannot negotiate with Iran, and that they have the same problem with Russia, by the way, and with China. They think that they are going to go away because they think that they are normal and everyone else is abnormal. And all those who are abnormal, they will not last, but they're going to be there for good. The reality is that as a result of this, they cannot negotiate with Iran with success because they cannot recognize that Iran is not afraid of its position. It is very self confident. It has confidence about its strength. And so Iran is not going to be intimidated by Trump. When Trump says you have to give up nuclear enrichment, Iran is not going to give up nuclear enrichment. If Trump says Iran has to give up its missile capabilities, Iran is not going to do that. They think that through sanctions and intimidation and war that will change. That's not going to change. And I think they've been proven wrong time after time after time, but because they live in that bubble, reality still doesn't get through. They think next time, hopefully next time, the regime, as they like to call it, will be gone. So, as long as the United States and the Europeans don't take negotiations seriously, as long as they don't come to the recognition that Iran is here to stay, Iran was here thousands of years before the United States came into existence and thousands of years before the European countries came into existence. And it will be here probably after the United States has been thanks to Trump and the likes of Trump's efforts, it goes downhill. Iran will probably be here for a very, very long time afterwards. If they come to that recognition that Iran is a normal country, that when Iran there is debate, it's not infighting and internal struggle, it's politics. When there are protests in Iran, if they look at it as the protests in their own countries and they see this as normal, then they can come and negotiate with Iran in a realistic sense. Until that happens, until there's a change in mentality in the West, until there's that bubble of arrogance is burst, I'm afraid that I'm not optimistic about any real long-term change in the relationship. I would like to have improved relations with Europe. I would like to have normal relations with the United States. But the problem does not lie in Tehran. It never did lie in Tehran. But that's something that they fail to get through their thick skulls. Iran is not anti American in the sense that it hates the United States and as a nation. Iran is against US foreign policy because US foreign policy is aggressive, abusive, and the United States is hegemonic and it has imperial ambitions. It is an imperialist power which wants more power. Iran won't accept that. This is the state of play. If the United States were to behave differently toward during the I mean, the Americans like to cry about Iranians chanting death to America. Just recently, we saw Trump's son say that the Iranians every day they're chanting death to America, as if like you walk down the streets in Tehran, people are chanting death to America. Uh, in ceremonies, political ceremonies, when people chant death to America, it's like chanting Yankee Go Home. Is nothing when people say Yankee go home in Latin America, they're not saying, like Americans with, who are in those countries should leave the country and no, they're talking about the regime in Washington. So death to America, when they say that, they're talking about US foreign policy, just like the Soviet Union. You recall, well, you're younger, but in the past, the Iranians also chanted death to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan and it was also supporting Saddam Hussein. After the Soviet Union changed its policy near the end, um, after Perestroika and Glasnost and Gorbachev's, that period, the relationship improved and Iranians stopped chanting slogans against the Soviet Union. And of course, then when the Soviet Union collapsed, Iran's relationship with Russia was normal, and today we see the relationship is excellent. The relationship between Iran and Russia is excellent. It's better today than it's probably ever been. So the problem with the United States, and sorry for taking so long in my response, the problem with the United States is that they cannot wrap, they cannot come to terms with reality. Whenever they come to terms with reality, they can improve the relationship. But until then, I think this is how things are going to be. The Europeans and the Americans are going to constantly try to do something, but it will not be useful or impactful. And it's not just Iran. Increasingly, their behavior towards the entire global majority is erratic, it's arrogant, and it's isolating them more than anyone else.